Okay, so thanks everyone for joining in today. Thanks, Aiden, for the introduction and for organizing this. Thanks to all the organizers. It's really fun to be participating in a Drupal Toronto meetup after what 6 months of moving to Toronto. uh, I've been missing all the previous ones, and finally the one I make it, I'm speaking here. So thank you for that. Today we'll be talking about migrating to Drupal, and uh, we'll mainly be talking about bringing content from Drupal 7 and other systems into Drupal 8 or 9 system. And more accurately speaking, I'll be demoing how to bring in content from Drupal 7 to a Drupal 9 system. But we'll also be going over a lot of principles on how you can write migrations that help you get content from other systems, any other system, could be CSV files or WordPress or SharePoint or anything like that. So why is this not? Okay. So that's me. I know you can see me on video, but I have a general practice. It's like it's become a ritual for me that the second slide is always my photo. I don't know when it started, but anyway, that's what it is. So I'm an engineering manager at Axelerant. I am also a Drupal contributor since I think about 7 years now. I started contributing with Drupal core and then moved on to. I still contribute to Drupal core. I'm not moved on from there, but I also contribute to a lot of modules and also maintain a few modules. You can usually find me at Hussain Web in most places. That's on Drupal.org, on GitHub, on Twitter. I'm fairly easy to reach on Twitter. I think that's the best way to reach me if you want to. Email, I don't even use email that much anymore. And yeah, anything that's not Drupal related or that's just related to Drupal, you can find that on my GitHub profile, also at Hussain Web. So let's talk about what is migration. And migration simply is moving a bulk of content from one environment to another. And that's the key word here. You're not moving one piece of content. Yeah, at a time, you're probably moving one piece of content, but the objective is to move a bulk of content, a whole group, all of anything actually, from one environment to another. And when we talk about Drupal, Drupal is a content management system, right? And the objective here is to get content into Drupal from elsewhere. And it's not as simple as just getting content into Drupal from elsewhere. You typically have to process it a bit. It's from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. Maybe, yeah, okay, you can get it pretty much, you can just like read it and save it. But in most of the cases, you'll have to do processing. Even, in fact, even a fairly complicated Drupal 7 website, you might have to process content a bit. And the good news is, at least as far as the Drupal core and most popular contributed modules are concerned, they handle that processing for you. And we'll take a look at that. And as it stands, the processing can get as complex as you like. And that's one of the features of Drupal's migration capabilities as well, that the processing can be really elaborate as you like, and you can extend it even further. And this essentially is what we call extract, transform, and load structure. Typically in enterprise applications, this is very common, where you are, usually for reporting, but also if you're moving content from one place to another, this process is formalized in these 3 steps. You're extracting content from one place, you're transforming it, you're making transformations, which is typically related to the kind of reports that you want, and then you're loading it into a report. That's ETL. Drupal's migration works along very, very similar lines. It extracts content from a source, it transforms the content, and it loads it into the Drupal system. So with this in mind, let's look at what features do we have in Drupal to support this kind of architecture. So there has been a Drupal, there has been a module called Migrate since a long time. You can see from the screenshot, it's since 2009. That's 11 years now. We have had this module that lets you migrate content into Drupal 6 and Drupal 7 systems. This is before Drupal 8 was there. And this module worked really well. I really enjoyed using this module, even when it was from some other system to Drupal 7. And since Drupal 8, this module is in core in a very different form, but still, we'll walk through over the similarities today. I'm sorry, yeah. So one of the key concepts you have to understand when working with Migrate module is to understand declarative programming. And that essentially means that you describe what you want to do, not how to do it. And there are very popular examples. The two of the examples that I can think of immediately are Ansible and Terraform. These two systems and Migrate module as well. The way you write migrations is you tell what you want to do. This is in contrast with your regular imperative style of programming, where you actually write code which tells the machine how you want to do something. Whereas in Migrate, you're just telling that, okay, this is the source content, this is the kind of transformations I want to apply, and this is how I want you to save it. And then it's the module's job, it's the Migrate module's job to figure out how to do that. And if you're familiar with Ansible or Terraform, they are very similar. In Ansible, you just tell it how to provision a server. In Terraform, you just tell it what kind of infrastructure you want, but we'll not talk about that over here. So let's look at what this looks like. In Drupal 7, it looks something like this. You can see that, can I get some annotation? Yeah. So you can see that the way you do this is by adding what are called as mappings. And you can see that this is a method. In a migration class, we would write a method like this, add field mapping, that I want something in source to be stored in something in destination. I think the source, yeah, okay, let's use this. So from a source field UID, I want to save it in picture. You're telling Migrate that this is what I want to do, that, UID, save it into picture, and I can add on to it. So like, this is an example of a transformation that I'm telling that the source migration is some other migration I have referred. It's basically a transformation, and we'll look at that as well. So how do I? Yeah. Okay. So in Drupal 8, like I said, Migrate has moved into Drupal 8 core since the beginning. In fact, Drupal 8, as many of you know, was so different from Drupal 7 in architecture that nobody even thought of, like, okay, let's upgrade in place. So before Drupal 8, if you wanted to upgrade to Drupal 7, you would just run a script and it would modify the content in place, modify the database in place to match the new schema. And it worked very well until Drupal 7. But with Drupal 8, the architecture changed so much that it was very complicated to write upgrade scripts like that. And so what they decided that they would, instead of transforming the data in place using the upgrade scripts that you might be familiar with, using the hook update scripts, if you're a Drupal developer, you would know. Using those methods, let's just migrate things into a Drupal 8 website. And that's how Migrate got into Drupal core. And it got restructured. And now it looks something like this. So what we saw as field mappings before, now they are process plugins. Over here, I'm essentially saying that, okay, there is a field in the source, there is a field called user login, save it in a destination field called name. You specify, one second. Am I still audible? Is it?
Yeah, we can hear you too. Yeah.
I think I've lost control of my mouse.
Did you? Okay. Oh, no.
Yeah, no, I can't annotate anymore. Just one second. Okay. That's weird. Just give me a minute. I can't.
Not a problem.
Okay, any keyboard shortcuts to get out of this annotate mode? I think that's crashing on me. I'm sorry about this.
Are you using Google? Is that a Google slide or?
No, I'm using PowerPoint, but I think Zoom's annotate has taken over control and I can't get my mouse back.
Zoom. Is that like the Zoom screen, right?
Okay.
For you sharing?
Yeah, I think yeah.
Oh
When I'm
yeah, there you go.
annotating, yeah. Okay. So let me back up. I think I'll avoid using this annotate. Uh, all right. So where was I? Yeah. So I spoke about the process mapping, and the way you define a source and a destination is by using these constructs in this migration file. So you have here I'm saying the source is a plugin called WP user. And typically you also mention few other details like what exactly does the plugin need and a destination. And I'm saying that is a user entity in Drupal. So this migration that you see right now on your screen is getting user details from from a WordPress source. This is a plugin that I had written. It's a contributed module. I can talk about that later. And it's translating the fields from WordPress to Drupal and saving it into a Drupal user. All right. So moving on. So let's talk about plugins. I mentioned plugins a couple of times by now. So let's talk more about that. I don't really intend to go too deep into plugins. If you're a Drupal developer, you already know what plugins are. For example, in Drupal 8, we have blocks which have been converted into plugins. In fact, a lot of things have moved to this plugin architecture in Drupal 8. And it's basically designed to allow your system to be extendable. This was typically carried out by hooks earlier. But many pieces of these, what was Drupal hooks in Drupal 7, they have moved to in Drupal 8. A lot of them have moved to either plugins or events. And so, getting back to the migration, migration uses a lot of these plugins. What we'll worry about today are these mainly these three plugin types: source, destination, and process. And technically, implementation wise, the migration itself is a plugin type, but that's more of an advanced topic. We'll not look at that right now. It's just FYI. But we'll be looking at source, destination, and process in a little bit more detail. So we already covered these parts of migration. We identified the source. And you can see, again, I'm repeating this. There is this plugin, WP term. You can see this on line 5. So this WP term is a source plugin, right? And then you have in process on line 10, for example, you have a plugin called default value. And this is a type of a process plugin. You can see that being used a couple of times. And again, another fun fact, if you don't see, for example, line 12 or 13, where I'm directly assigning a where I'm directly assigning a field from source to destination, it's actually just a shorthand. It is actually written internally. It is a plugin called get, and this is eventually stored into a destination, and that again is represented by plugin over here. For example, in this case, on line 19, you can see the destination plugin is a taxonomy term, right? So let's talk a bit more about this plugin. So what do source plugins do? As the name says, it allows you to read content from a source. So in Drupal core, Migrate, it provides a source plugin to read data from SQL sources, your regular SQL databases. And Drupal Upgrade, which I'll demo shortly, that provides source for Drupal 6 and Drupal 7 entities. So there are two things here. Drupal core does provide a basic SQL class that will let you read data from any SQL data source. But then there are other plugins, other source plugins that Drupal Upgrade module provides, which is in core, by the way. And that provides source for things like a D6 node or a D7 node or a D6 term or D7 term and so on. And so when we saw in the previous examples, a source plugin called WP term, in a Drupal migration, you would probably have a source plugin of D7 node. Okay, and like I showed in the previous example, there are more specialized sources that provide plugins to read content from, like, for example, WordPress. The example we saw was from WordPress, but you can also have source plugins of that lets you read from a CSV file or directly from an API, from like a JSON feed or an XML feed or things like that. And then there are destination plugins, and you don't really need a lot of specialization over here. It, like the name says, it lets you write content to Drupal, and most used destinations are content entities of any type, like node or user. That's where you're going to migrate to. And even if you're writing a custom entity, you could name that entity your custom entity, and you can migrate to that entity. Uh, then there are the destinations could be, for example, fields, in which case contrib modules may define additional migrations. So, for example, let's say a complex field like address, for example. So it can provide a destination which will let you easily write to an address field, for example. And in Drupal, in case of Drupal to Drupal migration, destinations could be config entities. This technically does not have to be Drupal to Drupal migration, but in other cases, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But the point here is that you can even migrate to config entities. For example, you could migrate, you could create field instances as part of your migration. And that's exactly what happens in a Drupal to Drupal upgrade. And then we have process plugins. We already saw a bit earlier, we saw plugins like default value. And you can have custom plugins. For example, I don't have line numbers here, but on the line next to below body value, you have a plugin called strip et tags, which is a custom plugin I wrote for WordPress migration. This particular WordPress site had some custom plugin tags in it, and which I needed to remove. So you can pipeline plugins that way. So over here, if you see the destination body / value, that actually goes through two plugins. One is strip et tags, and then another plugin called WP content. And that's again another plugin that's specialized for WordPress. There are other plugins called migration lookup. In fact, migration lookup, and there are a lot of other plugins which are, you can see a list over here. It's also in documentation. So you have plugins called get, which is, like I said, implied. If you don't mention a plugin, it's get. But you also have things like migration lookup or subprocess or extract or flatten. And these are all advanced use cases when you want to transform content from the destination, from the source into the destination. And this actually allows you a lot of power. Very typically, even for very complicated transformations, it is actually possible to write a lot of those transformations just using these plugins. You don't really have to write PHP code. That's an option. There are things that you can't do with these plugins. And in that case, you would write your own plugin. But a lot of those things, they are possible. And the value in doing that is that anybody reading the migration can immediately get a picture of what's happening. So for example, in this again, I can see that, for example, from the very first line, the field post title is being stored in title. And for example, body format. Now this, I don't want it to, it's coming from WordPress, so I don't really have a concept of formats in WordPress. So there's nothing to migrate from in this case, but I want to set it. And what I'm going to do is set it to rich text, and that's what default value plugin lets me do. And similarly, body value, it's a little bit more complicated procedure. I want to do two things. First, I want to strip those tags which are there from that WordPress plugin, and then I want to do some processing which is generic to all WordPress content. So I have changed. I've changed a plugin. I've changed this process so that I can do a little bit more complex thing. And with things like subprocess and migration lookup, you can write really powerful migrations without writing PHP at all. So getting back to this, let's go over a Drupal upgrade. And as you heard before, Drupal 9 is just around the corner. Actually, it's next week. I think it's releasing this Wednesday. And so in that spirit, what I'm doing is I'm going to demo how would you upgrade to Drupal 7 to Drupal 9. So there are two ways to run Drupal upgrades. One is migrate everything, config and content, and that's the original use case of Drupal upgrade. That is, you have a Drupal 7 site, and you're going to run this migration script, and you'll have hopefully a very identical Drupal 8 site. And the second way is kind of what I prefer is that you rebuild the site and then you just migrate the content. And you can still use the Drupal upgrade module in that case, and this is what I'm going to show in the demo today anyway. So a few tips, and before I go into this into the demo, run Drupal upgrade on a clean site. It's if you're already working on a Drupal 8 site and it already has some content, there is a very good chance your content may get overwritten. So it's always better to run Drupal upgrade on a clean site. That's the original intent of Drupal upgrade anyway, that you're that you're upgrading from 7 to 8 or 7 to 9, that you're not migrating. And a second thing, you might be using a lot of contrim modules. For example, we'll see a migration with paragraphs today. So you would also need to enable paragraphs before you start the migration. You would also need to enable paragraphs on your destination site, because these modules, they provide migrations. For example, paragraphs module, it provides migration support necessary to migrate the paragraphs itself. And in case you don't see modules migration, in fact, at this point of time, a lot of modules, they have this migration built in now. But there was a time when, in fact, I remember writing process plugins for a lot of these modules like address and, few other things like that. And even for moderately complex sites, consider building the site and then use Drupal upgrade to just migrate the content, not the config, because that's an opportunity for you to rethink the content architecture. We'll talk more about this a bit later. So I'll jump into the demo. Okay, so so here I have set up a few kind of like a scaffold, and I have that up on GitHub as well. I think you might see the link in your chat soon. So this site is basically, I've set up a Lando. Lando is kind of like a development environment. It lets me run PHP and Apache and everything on my system. There are a lot of options. You might be using something like Drupal VM or DDev or MAMP or something like that. I prefer using Lando. So over here, I have defined, in this Lando file, I have defined 3 different websites. One is the one you see over here is my regular Drupal 9 website. It's using PHP 7.4. And then there are 2 Drupal 7 websites. We'll migrate from both of them. One is, you don't need to worry about what this Lando code does. I'm just showing that this is, that there are 2 Drupal 7 websites, and you can see them here. Okay, I'm just going to confirm. So like I said, this is a very brand new Drupal 9. I've already installed this in the interest of time. I'm not going to walk through the installation steps and all that, but you can see this is my URL for Drupal 9 website. And all I'm going to do here right now is just verify that paragraphs is installed. Okay, it is installed. Right, and you can see that, okay, come on, wake up. Okay, yeah, all right. So it's a very, very simple base Drupal 9 website. It's blank. You can see from content that, okay, there's no content over here. In fact, I just cleared out a database before this presentation. And we look at a D7 website. Now, what I've done here is it's a very simple Drupal 7 website. And all I have installed over here is Devil. There's nothing else. So what I'm going to do is make sure there is no content over here. And I think it's like the containers are waking up again. Yeah, there's no content. So what I'm going to do is like create a few, I have this Devil. I'm just going to generate some content. Actually, before generating this, let me generate some terms as well. So I'm going to generate, like, let's say 10 terms, right? And that's done. And I'm going to generate some content as well. Both content types, article, basic page, and generate. Okay. All right, so now I have some dummy content in this website, and I'm going to walk through a migration. All right, so we have our source site ready and our destination site ready. Everything's installed right now. And I'm going to jump into the terminal to start migrating this. Let me do it here. I hope this is readable. Yeah. So, so yeah, before this, while Drupal upgrade has this site, I've already enabled the migrate modules, for example, but then there are some other modules which help your process. So if you're just going to use Drupal core, you would probably go to, after enabling the modules, you'll go to your Drupal site address and go to upgrade, and then you'd follow these steps. Now, this is fine. This lets you upgrade from a Drupal 7 website to Drupal 8 or 9 very easily, but it doesn't give you much control. This is an example of the first case I mentioned, that you migrate everything, config and content into the site. And it doesn't let you look at what migrations are running, or it doesn't basically let you run migration one at a time. It just does everything in one go. It creates the migrations and it'll run it, and that's it. And if this works for you, great. But the method I'm going to demo today is something that gives you a bit more control. So for that, I have installed a few modules, which is which is again on Drupal.org. So yeah, so over here we see this migrate module. This is actually part of core. And migrate Drupal and migrate Drupal UI. So migrate Drupal, it contains migrations from older Drupal versions. So for example, if you're migrating from, let's say, WordPress to Drupal, you would probably not enable this module at all, migrate Drupal or Drupal UI. But in our case, we are migrating from Drupal. So this module gives us all of those source plugins, like D6 node and D7 node, which lets us read Drupal content from a source database. And this UI module is just something that gives you that /upgrade. So for the rest of the demo, I don't even need this migrate Drupal UI module. Now, on top of these two, I'm going to use these three modules, Drupal upgrade. It basically gives me a Drush support. I like running things from Drush, not from the UI. So it gives me the Drush support and migrate tools. And this is the thing, like if I want to run generic migrations, this is something that will let me do it from Drush. Again, we'll look at those Drush commands. And this migrate plus is it's enhancements. Some of the plugins I mentioned earlier, they're only available in migrate plus. And the only reason is that they're not in core, because there is a higher standard of getting things into core. So like these plugins, which are useful in some edge cases, they are in this module called migrate plus. We're just going to enable all of these anyway right now, right? So let's get back here. And I'm going to run this command, migrate upgrade. So this is the command that I got using that the Drush support module, right? Now let's look at the parameters here. So I'll just get in the middle of the screen. Wow. Yeah. So if you see the parameters over here, I'm going to do the simple one first, right? So yeah, so look at this command. Now, the first parameter is the DB key. And this is basically the database key you have specified in settings.php. I prefer this way. You can also use another parameter called DB URL, wherein you would specify the source database details in over here itself. But what I've done over here is I have specified those details in my settings.php. One second. So that's one of the reasons I have put all these three websites in one Lando project, because, oops, let me move this. Yeah. So because now I can access all the databases from my Drupal 9 site. So this is a typical settings.php I use with Lando. Don't try to read too much into the details here if you're not familiar with Lando. The important thing here is that I've defined, so this is my default database, and you're probably familiar with this already. This is where I set the access details for my database. But I've also defined two more database keys, and this is for both the Drupal 7 sites I have today. This is the D7 simple and complex, and this is enough. So this is the key, D7 simple. That's the key I'm going to use today in this thing. And the next parameter is legacy root, and that's the URL to my site. And this is required because it needs to even get the files. That you might have seen Devel generate a few files. And if I want to get those files into my new system, Drupal 9 needs to know from where it can download those files. So this is the path it can, this is the path from where it can get it. It can, if the files are available locally, that's another migration tactic. We'll talk a bit about it in performance. So you could point it to a local folder, for example. And next parameter is configure only. I'm telling it not to run the migration, just create the plugins. Just create the migrations, don't run it. So we'll look at that. So if I execute this command, it won't take a lot of time. It will just identify all the, it will look at the source database, identify all the migrations it needs to run, and creates them in this site.
Hi, Hussain, just a quick note. We got about 10 minutes in total left.
Yes.
So I think we're running short on time. So what I'm going to do is you could run through the presentation and we'll stop just before 1 and then do questions. And if people have to go, then they might hop off, but we'll do the question period starting at 1. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So we have migrations over here. All of our migrations have been generated. And so, just so that we can examine it, I'm going to export this. So these migrations get saved as config entities, which means I can use Drupal's config export import to look at these migrations. So they are here now. And I'm just going to look at a couple of them. So yeah, let's look at Node, for example. So you see the familiar, the migration that we looked at before. It's very similar to that. Let's not worry too much about all of these right now. We have the source called as D7 node complete. And if you're familiar with migration before, this is something that's been in Drupal course recently. I think it just got in this March. And earlier, the migration treated node revisions and node translations separately. But now with this new plugin, everything is in one migration. Like I said, this plugin get is implied, and the way Drupal generates it, it just writes it out. But this could just be this. They're both the same, right? And like you can see, all the node fields are we have migrations. You can see some example of sub-process migrations over here for more complex fields like tags and image, right? And now what I can do is I'll just quickly look at UI. UI also, I'll do this one, like a couple of these from UI. So I can see the migrations in structure, migrations, and all the migrations that I can that I have right now. Basically, these are the ones that got created just now. And I'm going to run, let's say, this complete article. Oops, clicked the wrong thing. Yep, this one. Okay, this takes a few minutes. Meanwhile, I'll open the content tab so that you can see that content is going to come in shortly. So right now it has executed all the dependencies, and now it's executing the article migration itself. And so you have the content over here. And I'll open one of them randomly. And you can see that the content is here. And some of them might have images. Which one might have an image? Okay, can't really find anything with an image right now. All right, maybe I'm just not finding it, or what I can do is I can make sure that I run all the migrations. This is what typically you should do. This is another drush command. It's usually this is the whole command. And this will basically run through all the migrations. Right now we have run only four of these. Oh yeah, D7 file has not run. So that's why there are no file migrations. But like I said, I prefer running it from drush. And if I just say dash all, it runs through all the migrations, one after another. And that's the better way to do this. There are other ways to classify things with like tags and everything. And typically you would want to do this in a more controlled way, not using dash all. But for the purpose of demo, this is good. So we have all our migrations run. And let's look at some of these. Yeah, so now we have images as well. So images and content have been migrated. And So I think I'll skip the complex migration, but take it from me, it works. And if you want to see what's changed, so just a very important note that apart from, like I said, the contrib modules need to have that support. And paragraphs modules has that support for most of the content, but the paragraphs themselves are not being migrated. And then I found a patch for it. And the code, again, which you can find on GitHub, has that patch applied. Yeah, so you can see that the patch is applied, and paragraphs content also can be migrated in a very similar way. I think I can get back to this demo later if we have time, but for now I'll just move back to slides. All right, so planning a migration. So now we spoke about upgrades, and upgrades are fairly easier. They get complex if there is a lot of content, but again, still it's it's essentially like a very straightforward process, because you don't really, it's already in Drupal, and the Drupal concepts have not changed a lot from 7 to 8. So identify the information architecture. If it's not Drupal, try to figure out, where are you going to map the, each source page, how are you going to save it in Drupal, which content type, or is it going to be a taxonomy? Okay, determine the content mechanics. How often the content is being updated on the source side. For very large migrations, they could be like millions of nodes, and over there we have to be careful. We have to because running those migrations take time. Sometimes I have run through migrations which take hours, and for that time, we either pick, if it is possible, we either go for a content freeze, that like nobody's adding content on source in that point of time, or we determine, can we identify what content is new or what content is updated, and then use something which is called as high water marks to run our implementations incrementally. Then prepare the new information architecture. Like I said, even in case of upgrades, I prefer to recreate the content, and then I just showed how do you get the migrations by running the drush config export. What I would do is I would copy those migrations into my custom module and modify it to suit my new information architecture, and then just run those, delete the config, and just run my migrations after that, and write a migration for each type of source or destination content. This is just the execution part of the planning and migration. And like I said, in your, the way Migrate module works is that it will look at all the modules which has a migrations directory, and it will look for YAML files within it. So over in the screenshot, you can see that I have 6 migrations, with each, in one of them I'm migrating categories and media and tags, and the posts themselves. So plan out your migration. So for example, categories and tags both are going into taxonomy terms, but still I would write 2 different migrations just so that I can control them better. And then you can see that in the same module, I have that strip et tags plugin, which I hinted to from before. There are a few more migration concepts, which are not really required if you're just doing an upgrade. But in case of a more complicated migration, you would have to worry about these. These are stubs. Sometimes content has dependencies, cyclic dependencies, and you can't resolve them. In that case, you create stubs before that. High watermarks, you would use this for incremental migrations. And each, you can define dependencies between migrations. So for example, when I ran that article migration, it ran 3 other migrations before that, and that's a dependency. So before running node migration, it has to get the node types, and before that, it has to get user roles and everything. And then there is map tables. So map tables are used for mapping the source to destination, and this is something that you can use for tracking updates and errors. Again, for Drupal upgrade, you would probably not look at this, but if you're writing a custom migration and you want to track how much, what kind of content or how much content was migrated, this is very, very useful. And it's also used by plugins such as migration lookup, which I'm afraid I don't think we'll be able to cover now. And executing migrations, I already covered this module, migrate tools. This gives you a bunch of commands like these: migrate, import, or rollback, or stop. And like this lets you control the migration. For example, a long running migration, you might want to stop it cleanly. So you have commands to do that. And so with that, let's talk about how to write efficient migrations. Plan for incremental runs, even if you think that, okay, you can run the migration in one go and you can freeze the content on source and you can run the migration in one go, still plan for incremental runs. It's not that hard. High watermarks, they sound little abstract, but they're quite simple really. And look at migration performance. If any of your migration is running slow, there are ways to look at how to resolve that performance issues. For example, one migration was running particularly slow because the migrate map table did not have an index. This was long back. And then understand dependencies. Like if you can break down your dependencies. So one example is that if you're migrating files, more specifically, if you're migrating media, just migrate the files before one. You just have to migrate files once, and then you can migrate the actual content. And once you break these dependencies, you will realize you have a lot more control, and your overall migration is much more faster. And a few more tips: replicate your source data to an isolated environment. Don't try to run it from a live database. It's better for performance as well. Sometimes you would want to clean your source data. So for that, try automating that. Even if you're going to do the cleanup once, automating tells you exactly what you're doing for that. Run each migration using Drush and verify. You can verify it with just by looking at the content count or looking at the map tables. So I'll just rush through this because I think these are kind of things which I've already covered before. Right. Yeah, I think high watermarks have already covered. I think this is important and this is often forgotten. Disable any modules that can cause side effects. So for example, you might have a module which would send an email for every node update, and that is very risky during a migration. You should just disable that. And then there are other tricks that use like event subscribers to modify content conditionally. These are really advanced use cases and they are somewhat hacky, but they work. And then migration also gives you those instruments, which tells you like exactly what's taking time in a slow migration. Again, this is a more advanced use case. And then finally, validation. Back in the days, I have in fact built modules that kind of give a better reporting. In fact, in the UI today, we saw that it gives like a very basic reporting that okay, how many pieces of content it find in source and how many got migrated. But you can get really elaborate with that. That's one of the strengths of how migrations are stored. And in a more elaborate setting, identify key traits. Like what fields have to be present on destination, right? Or what kinds of content have to be present on destination. And then write automated tests to verify it on destination that okay, yeah, those content after a migration, that content is visible on destination. So that's it. I think I'm 4 minutes beyond time. Yeah. So
awesome. That is amazing. Thank you so much. This is like like an overload of awesomeness, and the timing is great because if everyone didn't know, end of life for Drupal 7 and 8 is 18 months away. So you've got a year and a half to sort out all these details. So again, thank you so much, Hussain, for this this presentation. It's amazing, and we'll be sending out the link after in a couple days. And I'm just going to take over the screen because I want to, just before folks hop off, say thank you so much for everyone who participated today. There is the bit.ly link for the survey. So if you have to go, please, no one ever does links, these survey links later. So if you can hop into there now, it's really quick and simple survey, bit.ly.com/DTO, all in caps -2. And that will be for the survey for this session. Again, give us your ideas and feedback. It's really important for us to organize and make sure that this provides the most value to you. And I also wanted to just plug our next Drupal Toronto topic, which is on June 19th. This one I think is super awesome and relevant to the time. The COVID-19 Ontario.ca website is built in Drupal. So we're going to have a case study from Nick, who's a super active member of the Toronto Drupal community, and he's going to give us a breakdown of how on earth they built the COVID website in Drupal in like a super short period of time, with everything being changing and using agile processes to manage that. So I'm very excited about that. You can find us on Twitter at DrupalTO. Of course, the meetup group on meetup.com, and we have a Slack channel as well. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending today. What we're going to do now, if you got to go, hop off, and hopefully we can see you next time. And then what we'll do is move into questions and just stay on the line. And we're also going to have maybe a little bit of socializing and stuff over about the next 15 minutes if you got the time. So again, thank you, Hussain, for your presentation. That was awesome. And yeah, if you got to go, hop off. And otherwise, let's stay on the line for questions.
Yes, awesome. That was awesome. Thank you, Hussain. That was awesome. So in the chat, we have one question. I don't know if it's a question or it's a comment, but it's saying that I have just a basic question: tips for user Drupal 7 password to new Drupal 8 and 9 or 9 instead of sending notification to change user password. So
yeah, someone could hop on if you want to clarify that question, but it sounds similar to you suggesting to disable email notifications.
That's right.
For systems.
I think I get the intent, and so if I understood the question correctly, and Nishant, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the question is, that in Drupal 7, a password is encrypted, hashed. So you cannot reverse engineer it and store it in Drupal 8, and that's a given, yeah, right? So how do you handle that instead of sending a notification? So like normally one option is that you would not worry about this. You would not migrate the password, but once everything is migrated, you tell the user to go and reset the password. That's I think that's what the question is.
That's right. I think so. But yeah,
that's right.
Are you? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's the question. Yeah, you're right.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So Nishant, this could be a little outdated info, but I do remember Drupal 8 having support to read Drupal 7 hashes, and there was a very simple process plugin, which lets you modify the hash in a very minimal way that would, when it gets stored in Drupal 8, it will still be hashed. But Drupal 8 supported both of those hashing mechanisms, the updated one and the one in Drupal 7. And what it would do is when the user logs in, it will look at the password field, it will look at the hash, and it will see if it's a Drupal 7 hash, it will still be able to process it. Right now, this is a little outdated information, so I might be getting the versions wrong over here, right? But I think I would suggest looking at a process plugin related to password, and it should be there in the user migration. In fact, I have this open. I can check up on that. But yeah, that's essentially how you would deal with this.
Okay, awesome. So there is no more questions, but if anyone will open their mic and jump in and ask a question, we still have a few minutes.
I got one. What goes wrong with paragraphs migrations that, so paragraphs is hard already. So let's say, multilingual websites using paragraphs already have a sort of challenging structure where, gosh, I'm trying to remember to make sure that get this right. The field is not translated, but the instances of the paragraphs are translated. I think that was the recommended method for implementation. Have you ever run into any excitement or challenges with this, or is this just the same process?
Pretty much the same. I think the problem with paragraphs is that it appears as a part of Node, like how other fields appear to be a part of Node. But with paragraphs, in fact, the multilingual challenge that you mentioned as well, that's again a side effect of this. A paragraph is basically a different entity, a paragraph item entity. And what you're storing on Node is just a reference to that entity. Right now, when you're creating a node or when you're editing a node, you see it within the node, right? And that gives an impression that everything is a part of Node. And those translation those settings that you make for translation and all that, they don't make immediate sense. But the way you would look at it is that since it's a different entity, it handles multilingual features in its own entity base. So you're not really translating. So if you're following the regular multilingual features, even on paragraphs field, what would happen is that internally in the database, you would be storing different IDs for each translation. So for an English, you would have a paragraph item entity ID 1. For French, it could be 2, and so on, right? But that's not what you want. Paragraph item, in the entity handles translation by itself on its own field. So paragraph item, it's an entity, it's a fieldable entity, and on its fields, again, Drupal handles translation directly. So if it has a text field, that's where the translation happens, not on the notes field, on the paragraphs field. Right? So once we understand this structure, it's very it's not simple, but it's at least straightforward to write a migration planning for this. So similar to files, if you remember in articles, I had to remember to run the file migration first, right? Even in paragraphs case, I have to make sure I run the paragraph item migration first, so that I get those things migrated. The migrate map tables are full with the destination ID, and then when I run the node migrations, it can look up the ID from the map table. So if writing a paragraph migration, you'd have to remember to write 2 different migrations. And that's what I was going to demo. Unfortunately, we're short on time. But we wouldn't have seen that exactly what migrations get created for paragraphs and on the node fields.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. I have one. It's a question, but it's not a question. Is a request. Can you share the patch that you mentioned for paragraph?
I can.
On your,
yeah,
if you can post on the chat, and I think that will save a lot of people time for sure. So you already know the bug. Yeah.
I'm just. Oops. Where is the
okay,
Zoom
you
window?
Can just get it there. Any other questions, anyone? If not, we will basically just hang out for a little bit more. And yeah.
Awesome.
Can you share the hash plugin name? So
I'll try to hunt for that. Yes. Just.
Yes. So
By the way, for paragraphs, this is the issue, and it's pretty active. The patch is already in. The patch is being worked upon, and there's reviews on that. So it's very likely it gets committed soon. But for now you can have the patch.
we are already doing quite a bit of migration stuff, so it's good to have it in here, and good for everyone to have it this year.
Pierre, so you've already started migrations to Drupal 9 or no?
We have a few kind of lined up and stuff. We are doing some migrations like WordPress into Drupal. We decided that we are migrating to Drupal 8 because we already started. So rather than grabbing the Drupal 9, we are trusting the community that it's going to be an easy upgrade from Drupal 8 to 9. So that's the direction we are going. We are building one site totally rebuilt, and a migration from WordPress and the Drupal 7 into Drupal 8. And this site will be launched in a month from now. And if Drupal 9 is stable, then we will convert it to Drupal 9. If not, it's going to be something later on this year.
You still have 6 months or a year, I guess.
Yeah, at least, give a little bit. But seems that, what is the feeling? He's saying, what do you feel? So do you feel that, so here's a question for you. Do you feel that we are safe to start building Drupal 9 sites because so close to 8 and we are not going to be finding too many bugs and crazy stuff, or give time?
No, I think if you're identify some key functionalities, that's what I would suggest. And if those functionalities are satisfied by modules which are not very well maintained, then I would suggest stick with Drupal 8.9, which is also going to release at the same time, right? So you would be able to build confidence that your site works with 9, but you also have that deprecation layer that's going to be removed from Drupal 9, right? So yeah, that's what I would suggest. If and at the same time, see if you can figure out an alternative for those modules. Either get the upgrades in place, or like an alternative module or a custom module, or whatever makes sense in your case.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so because the clients weren't too confident and say, let's not jump in Drupal 9 and launch in July, right? So they said, let's launch with Drupal 8 and then see what happens with Drupal 9. Yeah. Okay,
I think
awesome.
with the contrib module support, I think it's very, very likely
good.
that, it's like what, 2,000 plus modules already supported with Drupal 9. So yeah, I don't see that as a big case. Chances are that, even if you start planning with 8.9, all the modules will be ready by the time you finish your site, right? And then it's a very simple upgrade to 9.
Yeah.
I have a very big upgrade coming. Some of you may know what site I'm talking about. Giant site up there.
That's
I have to go from 7 to 9 in the next year and a half. So
you do.
Maybe another case study.
Yes.
That definitely will be a case study.
Okay, awesome. So that's actually, that leads our last comment leads into maybe a question I kind of like open up to the group. Is anyone aware of any contrib modules that are not 9 ready yet that you're worried about? Like
that's a good question.
Not active? And you know what, frankly, the question is probably just 8 or 9 is probably the truth of the matter. Is like if something's 7 and important and not really updated to 9, it's maybe also not updated to 8. Is anyone aware of any?
Well, historically, I'm still using a flag like Alpha 2. It's locked on a site, and I built my own module on top of it because it wasn't ready for prime time. I still think it's on Alpha 4. And then rules. I don't know what's happening with rules, but I also had to build my own rules module for another thing that I did.
Rules is complicated because they got that money, right? That the community gave, Acquia gave, and they got rules totally rebuilt up to 60%, I think. And then the rest is so complex and people are not touching it. And so it's kind of stuck in there. And it was so complex that they got the money and they gave it to one guy. And this guy or a group of a very small group of people, they worked on that and then it stopped. So the rest of the community kind of didn't start using, and then now I find that nobody's supporting every time I go to rules because I love it in Drupal 7, right? But in Drupal 8, I kind of stayed away, and the same thing, we start writing our own stuff as well.
I guess, yeah, so I did training in Drupal 7, like a whole like DrupalCon workshop on rules. And like, it's a deep well of,
yes.
of actions, but and again, I'm not like a back-end dev, so is it possible that some of the Drupal 8.9 underlying architecture makes rules-like behaviors easier to program these days, or is it?
Yes, I find that's what we come up with. The solution is much easier to write a simple, lightweight module than going and install the whole rules, because it's not that easy to set up anymore like it used to be in 7, right? It's not intuitive and that kind of stuff. It's very like a robust, that rules module. So then that's what we've been doing, at least for us. Anyone else the same, or are you guys, anyone using actually rules in 8?
Susanna commented rules 8 in D8 is terrible in the chat.
Yeah, so there you go. Yeah, so that's what we found too when we did. It was too much. It was like, renting a big dump truck to do a little pickup truck job. So then we decided to build our pickup truck just because we're developers.
Yeah, I had like 8 or 10 like rules that I needed, and I kind of wrote those in hooks and then pushed them into like object oriented, like that got simpler because I was able to push it out and sort of generalize some of the steps. But I wrote like my own little hot rod rules module that did exactly what I needed. Very cheap configuration.
Yeah, and I think here's a lesson. So the way they did this approach, they raised money, grabbed a group of developer and one main guy working on this whole thing because I thought it's too complex for a group to work together. And it never took off because then it took away from the community probably. Right?
Or no human being can comprehend what's in there, like as another.
That's right. Just that very selected, smart people in there creating all that. And then when it came to us, it's like, woo, I don't have 2 years to figure this out, right?
So yeah, the 2 rules use cases I remember doing was one, stale content notification. So like we had like pages where they're like, you know, financial numbers went up on the pages, and we use that to like trigger notifications to the owner, be like every 6 months, you know, double check to make sure that these fiscal numbers are up to date. And then the other was like notifications for workflow processes. Does anyone have any comments on like, you know, what's the non-rules way of either of those use cases? So like something's ready for legal to review, send the, you know, the legal role users a notification, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
something like that. Like, you know, we use workflow for something like that.
That's what I was going to say to you. I haven't come to a very heavy workflow website process that needed anything that was outside of a workflow, and that was totally doing. Arsen, is Arsen here? Arsen, are you here?
Yep, I see one. I've switched to Grid. If you're not in Grid, switch to Grid is a good time.
Yeah, I switched to Grid. Oh yeah, I see his name right in here. In terms of like a workflow and stuff, I think we were talking a couple of days ago about that, and you were telling me something. Anything like beside the workflow module that we are using?
No, in our project we doesn't use anything like this, but in my own project I use it.
That's what you were talking about, yeah.
Yeah, but it was working without any rules. And
are you using workflow or you wrote? I can't remember.
No, I use it workflow.
Yeah.
Yeah, because now workflow so flexible and already provided so much flexibility and ability to create everything what usually needed everyone. So it's much powerful than in Drupal 7 it was.
There you go.
Yeah. And also we can extend workflow and make very fast something custom by extend some services or classes from existing workflow. Plugins that is provided for us everything what we needed. So, and what is related to notification, it also can be done by own custom solution, just with extend and triggers the event, and that's it.
I did like I had to send like thousands of emails with some rules. So what I did is I leveraged the queue workers plugins in Drupal 8, which were great because I was able to sort of not have any memory issues or anything like that. Just with queue workers, you could say, hey, spend 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 90 seconds sending emails, and then stop. And then you could run that cron as often as you want. So that was pretty cool.
Awesome.
Cool.
Has anyone played with or seen the new, so the Drupal 9 features, which we talked about it, you know, just Drupal 9's not featuring new features is kind of the pitch, right? But there is officially like 2 or 3 things on there. Workspaces, and then the new front end theme maybe coming out in 9.1 in the winter. Does anyone have any taken a look at either of those 2 things, or? I'm kind of curious to see what. So I knew the new theme looks cool. That's awesome.
It does. Yeah. And by the way, those things are like anything in 9.0 will also be in 8.9. Just FYI.
Oh, that's cool. Right? They are backporting that thing, right?
Yeah. So you mean the theme, the Olivero theme? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm more excited about Claro, and there is another theme out there. You know, so Claro is going to be in core, right? But so that it has a little bit more conservative set of features. But there is another theme, Jin, which is based on Claro, and that looks really good.
Anyone? So we're using Claro now. Anyone else? Try give it a like. We just sort of dove in. We're like doing a lot of theme admin UI work, like pretty crazy like effort to make that editing experience better. And so far so good, but there's a lot of little things that just don't work, and then you have to go and it's probably, I don't know, Sebastian, what do you think? We're like 5 patches in or something, like, to get
something
it.
like that. But
Yeah.
most of it works fine.
Is that?
Yeah. So yeah, for 5 patches, and it's pretty good. So
It's pretty good, eh?
It's
So
just
now-
like we're doing it now. And we're like we know we're gonna get some pain from switching to Claro now, but it's just I don't want to redo the work we're doing in to the 7 theme.
For you, because of that custom stuff in the back you guys are doing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that handling well with a sub theme and just applying your stuff?
We have a crazy architecture.
I know you do, right? That's what I'm wondering. It's like, wow, that's pretty good. Yeah, and for anyone that doesn't know in here, so what we are talking here, so basically Claro for the admin theme, right? And then Aiden has a system that does some really cool stuff with the visual for the admin. So they have a sub theme that basically runs on that, and now they're running on top of a Claro. And it's pretty crazy, that stuff. It's like a sort of a Gutenberg sort of a way, and the Gutenberg, for those
inspired.
Who doesn't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Inspired.
It's like it's what you see is what you get in the front when you're changing and moving stuff.
Yeah. Well, when we figure out all the kinks, we'll show it around. But not quite there yet.
Sweet.
Okay, awesome. Well, I think we're almost at 1:30, so I think we'll wrap it up today. So thank you everyone for sticking around. It's great to connect, and so definitely hope to see everyone there. And Nick's presentation and for the June presentation, and like that's super awesome to see. Drupal like helping with this worldwide challenge that we're facing, and this is the Ontario scope one, but awesome to see it being used in such a way, and I'm really excited to check out that presentation. Awesome, and thanks Hussain. Thank you so much for your presentation. So everyone will send out the links early next week with the recording and the video. Please do the survey and let us know what you'd like to see for future meetups. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you for
Thank everyone.
It's a pleasure, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Bye.
Thank you.